Well, yeah, they put a big phone in there.
Because they're no, that's short.
No, I was about y'all. I was talking about this, it's not that big a deal. Like,
a lot of facts. Okay, so what happened? How did open it?
yeah.
How about our opening of our peer? The other neighbor just closed our elevator. So we explained like this, but all of that is
Yeah. No, you're good. You're good. Okay. 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 So you want me to send it to Fresh Start? No, not send it. Yeah, send it to Fresh Start. No, I mean send the question.
You see, man, it's good today.
I have not had it.
We're 90% what my day was like. I have 90%. 90%.
That's only true up here. So everybody wants your service.
It's been a heavy day. I contemplated even and I knew she was going to be last day of school. You into that? How was your day? It's next week, so I'm not. My day is Saturday. I have not. I go when you was whoever what your
Hey, but I think,
hang meat in here. You can hang meat in here. Yeah. That's why I'm being back at school. Like I'm still doing, I'm not teaching, but I'm still helping my special ed teachers, and I still get to see my kids every day. I got to walk around with inflatable eagle costumes this afternoon because we're the middle room eagles. I don't know how many kids call us pigeons, chickens. I'm like, what is our mascot? Oh, eagles.
It's nice to finally meet you. Better have yes, it is.
Mike does. It's a small world. It is. And I told you, right. I had 5 minutes with her and I kind of let other people talk and he said, she goes, turn to me. She said, I know her.
about to say, that's not helpful. What do you get when the head?
I'll try to get to you.
Good evening, everyone. I have the time as 6:02. We have 7 of our 9 board members here and 2 en route. So we have a quorum, and we'll go ahead and get started. As of right now, we have a pretty short agenda. We have 2 items in addition to adjournment on it. Updates for curriculum and attendance and discipline data and student wellness policy. Is there any additions or modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, I'd like to have a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
I have a motion from Ms. Lane, a second from Mr. Williams. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the agenda is approved. And with that, we have some updates from curriculum attendance and discipline data. Dr. Harris Mohammed, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I did want to recognize that we have our incumbent superintendent, Dr. Thompson, here in the audience. So, hi, Dr. Thompson. It's good to have you with us. Dr. Harris Mohammed, take it away.
Good evening, board members. Thank you so much. Our work session this evening will focus on, the majority of our work session will focus on the data, our attendance data. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about our where we are right now for the high school SOL assessment from the fall of 2025. And we're also going to talk about some accountability measures. We have some updates that are coming, that have come down. They were coming down a short while ago, but they are here and will be effective for the next school year. So we're going to talk about that as well. Also, I want to share with you, it's ongoing. A lot of the information from the Board of Education is still being reviewed and discussed. So we're going to talk about a review of the accountability changes, the measurements, as well as the Hampton City curriculum and the alignment, and of course with our incumbent superintendent, where we stand now with the adoption of the Hampton City curriculum. But first, I just want to share with you also that every year there are some policy updates from the General Assembly. I have tried my very best to keep you all abreast of those policy updates as they come forward. One that I shared with you all that must be in effect: school boards must adopt a student wellness policy no later than July the 1st of this year. So I have provided for you a sample that the language has come out of the Virginia School Board Association draft policy, as well as hitting the points of the General Assembly, points that must be made in the student and staff wellness policy, as well as it is highly recommended. You would not see this in the BSBA draft, but it's highly recommended that each school division develop a student wellness committee. And so that is something for you all to consider in the near future, so I wanted to share that with you. This evening, my partners this evening are Rachel Doyle, our interim curriculum and instruction director, as well as Ms. Rachel Bogue, our STEM innovation coordinator. She's also our division data analyst, and she is my partner in crime with testing. So she is our D.2. So we will get started. I don't have my clicker.
And thanks for giving us copies of the sample policy as well as a draft here for us to be able to review. So
yes, sir.
We have both just board members, there's a sample BSBA policy as well as a draft for Southampton County. So
the draft.
Well, only mine, and I don't know where this is on the agenda, but I do think that our policy needs to follow the format that's outlined for BSBA. We pay BSBA policy services, and all the other policies follow that format. So I would suggest this policy needs to follow the format think that we need to follow the format that's provided by the VSBA. And I do think that if there has been a change by the legislature, the VSBA does have, you know, an updated policy. So I would suggest that we contact VSBA Legal Services for their updated policy.
And thank you, yes ma'am. And on the webinar, this is what they have, and this is what I pulled out from the VSBA. That's what you're referring to, and then.
And this is what you provide me, I guess you provide all of us with the state of the VSBA, but what I'm saying to you is that we pay VSBA policy services. VSBA makes sure that they give us sample policies that align with all the requirements from the General Assembly. So what I'm suggesting is that if you called it, perhaps add an updated one that would include all of the requirements from any General Assembly update.
I will call them tomorrow, but this is what I just pulled this week. That's why I waited this week. The webinar was last week that we had with them, with their,
Bottom line,
yes,
Dr. Harris, I'm not trying to be impolite, but
Sure.
we need to follow the format.
Oh, absolutely, yes ma'am. And so, yes ma'am, I'm with you. So just for clarity, I inserted, the information that is recommended into their format. So absolutely, I would make sure tomorrow that if they have anything that's newer, I will pull that and provide that for you all as well.
And ours will look like this and not like this. You know, so we don't need something called leadership. We need nutrition, we need insert school division goals here, insert division goals here. You know, so I don't understand why you didn't follow the format that was provided.
If you turn the sample that was provided, I actually did when they have nutrition, promotion, and education, we have a title for that. Physical activity, we have a title for that. Other school-based activities, we have a title for that. So I just took what they had with the General Assembly, updated code. What I did not include were the division goals because I know that's something you all will be working on. And so that's why at the top it has draft, but yes ma'am, I have the titles that they have on page 2 and 3.
Yeah, so which means we don't need leadership, we don't need public involvement. You know, we need to look, ours needs to look like this.
Well, that's why it's a draft, right? And like, we're gonna work on it tonight when we get to it on the agenda. We can, but it was something I wanted to share with you that you will be working on because it has to be in your policy, has to be approved by the school board by July 1st. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
So I wanted to give it to you now so you can begin looking at. And again, I did not include the goals because I know that's something you all will be discussing, and I can do that, the goals that you have on the website currently.
So I think, yeah, so when we get to this on the agenda, we can chat through any recommendations there. It's our first read of a draft. I concur that we should follow the same policy formatting we have in other things. I'd like the opportunity, I'm gonna need the first read to be able to read through what's in the SBA draft and what's in ours and be able to kind of cross-reference that.
Yes, sir.
We're in a good place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
So, Ms. Rachel Doyle, Ms. Vogue, as I shared with you, are my partners in crime this evening. We are going to start our accountability overview. Our accountability overview, and as Ms. Vogue is coming to the podium, I am reviewing some of the final proposed Virginia Department of Education changes for the current school year, and there has been a lot of discussion around accountability, accreditation. Our seniors also can be identified as term graduates. A series of changes, as many of us know, were implemented in the fall of 2025 with the intent to be active this school year, and many of those changes were. A lot of the information we can follow from the Virginia Board of Education minutes and materials, and sometimes it is hard to search for those materials or pieces of information. However, we wanted to make sure that what we are presenting this evening, we all recall that it has come from somewhere, okay? Currently, there is still discussion about the finalization of the accountability system and the proposed changes. If you click on the link in your PowerPoint, Ms. Vogue and I together will talk about some of those proposed changes. And in June, all of the proposed changes that have come from out of committee in the General Assembly will be finalized at the June Virginia Board of Education meeting, while they're also changing some of the members on the board, okay?
That's clear as mud, thank you.
Absolutely.
Sounds just like
We have some definitions here that we just wanted to review. We also discussed having 2 new board members and understanding that we talked about many of these changes when they were in the midst of being reviewed and changed. Just as a review, SOL, standards of learning, standards of quality, which is the program where every public school in Virginia must provide. A major portion of state funding for public education is based on our standards of quality. For examples, class size, how many administrators you can have in the building based off of your student population in the building. And then much discussion and continued discussion is our curriculum framework, okay, which is a guide for all of our content areas for teachers to use as they begin to process their pacing guides or develop their pacing guides as required by the standards of learning. In addition, a few more Virginia Department of Education definitions. We're going to talk about what curriculum is, what the core curriculum is that we use, the curriculum alignment, which is primarily based off of what is being taught and what should be tested based off of what has been taught. Again, standards of learning, and then some of the resources, for example, as we call HMH, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, resources that we use as a part of our instructional program, which is a state-approved resource that has gone through the vetting process with the Board of Education committees that was formed and is required by the VLA, Virginia Literacy Act, okay? So what does all of this mean for Southampton County Public Schools? Well, it means that we should have, for our teachers, a curriculum in place that is aligned strictly with our standards of learning, okay? And we're going to talk about this as we move forward through the presentation, but a curriculum is a plan. I call it a roadmap that division would choose to implement on what our classroom teachers will teach to our students, which is the standards of learning, which is the minimum expectations from the Virginia Department of Education. Our current curriculum, as you all know, that was chosen to use as our roadmap for curriculum is the Hampton City curriculum. And something just jumped, not sure what happened. Okay. And so, as teachers are working with building leaders, working with the curriculum and instruction team, as well as the testing office, which is my office that I work out of, Division Director of Testing. We ensure, I'm a part of those discussions that ensure that what is coming out of our SBPQs or student has changed so many times, that as the student detail by question, items are matching what our teachers are teaching and also what our students must be assessed on. Our current curriculum practices in our school division, that was a question that we want to make sure receive clarity. Traditionally, our school division used a combination of the Virginia Standards of Learning, the curriculum framework, the blueprints that are provided, the grade level teacher developed pacing guides that they begin working on during the summer, any supplemental resources that we may have. Also, over the past 2 years, the Virginia Board of Education said, not only do we want you to choose supplemental resources, they have to be high quality instructional materials. So that is a part of this process. Even with the supplemental resources, they have to meet the standard of being an HQIM resource. Many of our staff members express interest in supporting the writing and development of a more thorough written curriculum for SCPS that is ongoing discussions, and will continue to be ongoing discussions as we transition into new leadership. So we're very excited that we have teachers that are willing. We have administrators that are also willing to be a part of that process, okay? So here, it just really talks about during the summer is where a lot of us do the work, the groundwork to make sure that our pacing matches not only the curriculum, but also is open to pivot based on the data from benchmarks, local teacher assessments, and in those areas where we have a team working on our alignment of our curriculum, they're also looking at, because Hampton City curriculum is very new to this division, and we're still learning a lot of things about the curriculum and the alignment, and that's why the work will continue to be done over the summer to make sure that even in the areas of K through 5 reading, K through 5 math, and 6 through 8 math, that there is a strong alignment and teacher input and administrator input, definitely teacher input into how the pacing looks in the fall when they return. The curriculum team expressed desire to start that work over the summer and not in the midst of the school year, which is really what teachers would like to do as well. All right, here I'm going to have Ms. Doyle come up and just talk a little bit about what our sample alignment looks like for pacing. We call it at a glance, but a snapshot of what that information looks like per module, per topic, per SOL that is covered. Ms. Doyle, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And I could probably be here for at least 4 hours telling you about the curriculum because it is that robust. So what I did in the presentation this evening is I tried to do little snippets because obviously I can't share the entire document, but I wanted to make sure we at least saw different subject areas, different grade levels, and also different levels, elementary, middle, and high. So the first thing that you see is an elementary pacing guide. And all of this is on a Google Sheet, and all of these underlined links are links to another Google Doc that has the module information in the curriculum. So this one is in English and Language Arts from 1st grade. It provides the module topic, the SOLs covered, and the amount of time expected to complete each module. So the first one is 1st grade reading. And on the next slide, this is a sample of the math pacing, and this is 3rd grade math. And again, it provides the unit topic, SOLs covered, and the amount of time expected to complete each module. If you flip to the next slide, we have 7th grade science, and this also provides the same information. And then on the next slide, we have history at the high school, and this is World History 1. So that's just samples of the pacing guides, and if you flip to the next slide, you will see these are the actual curriculum. This is once you click on that module or click on that unit, it will send you off into a module document or a unit document. And these, I did include the length of these documents because, like I said, we could be here for hours. That some of them are 33 pages long. This particular one for the elementary level is 4th grade Virginia Studies. It is 21 pages long. It provides standards, essential questions and understandings, assessments, teacher guidance, Bloom's taxonomy, bell ringers, required learning experiences, etc., laid out day by day. At the end of the document, there are additional resources, textbook resources, and websites, and the document is embedded with extensive amounts of links and resources. And all of those links and resources are accessible unless we don't have the program, which I spoke with Dr. Thomason from Hampton City, and she said at this point most of the links should be accessible by everybody. At first, when they first started doing it, you were required to have a program in place for some of the links, but now most of them are web-based links, so we should have access to that information. The next slide is English and Language Arts It is about 10 pages long for a module. 6th grade English and language arts is this particular one. And I apologize for reading this all to you, but I wanted to read it because I don't want to miss the piece where some content areas and grade levels have different resources. So sometimes it's dependent on the subject, sometimes it's dependent on the grade level. So for example, in kindergarten, you would expect to see phonological awareness. Thank you. You would expect to see phonological awareness, but you wouldn't expect to see that in 5th grade anymore on their curriculum. So this is a middle school English, and it provides standards, essential questions and understandings, assessments, teacher guidance, Bloom's taxonomy, learning experiences laid out week by week. The other one was day by day. Unit overview, administrative look-fors was a little bit different on this one, and opportunities for differentiation. At the end of the document, there are additional resources, textbook resources and websites, and then this one also has oodles and oodles of links and resources.
So basically, what you're telling us is that teachers receive this document and that teachers can go in and click on the links and get the things they need for the class.
That is
It's all
correct.
tied back to the SOLs, and we have it for each subject and each grade level,
Yes, ma'am.
basically. And these are just samples of what teachers would see.
Correct.
Okay.
I know you all wanted to see what it looked like, so we wanted to make sure you had access to that.
Mr. Dole,
Yes, ma'am.
with math, 3rd grade math, with all these like week 1 through specific skills are taught. If you go down to week 1 versus week 9, if you have an assessment, are you just gonna cover everything in that whole thing, or are you gonna cover something else? Because I think Southampton City has it off a little bit. If you don't finish everything, that assessment at the 9 weeks is gonna be off.
That is correct. But we do have, we now have InStructure. We are currently in the process of getting that up and running. And those assessments would be able to be edited, I believe, pretty sure.
What program, what did you say?
It's, so InStructure is the parent company, it's Mastery Connect.
Oh, okay, there,
Yes, ma'am.
Name changes can throw us off
all the time.
all the time.
My only question is, because I've used this before, I mean, and it's amazing, it's a lot, it can overwhelm teachers at first. I know some teachers like interactive notebooks and stuff, but what will kids take home for parents to help them review for tests and quizzes, if they so choose?
That is one of the things that we need to discuss as a curriculum team
Okay.
to figure out. That will most likely happen with that development.
Yeah, I know like with science and stuff, that well, when I was at the elementary level in Hampton, it was interactive notebooks, there, you know, you cut and paste still, but I don't know what it looks like for the high school or middle school, and I know those are some of those parents are also asking, like, what will, if we don't have a textbook, what will our kids have to help, you know?
Yeah, we will have to figure that out as a team to see what fits best for the division, but I mean, I'm thinking along the lines of, you know, a classroom teacher could easily do a weekly newsletter to say, hey, this is what we're working on this week, and I mean, really, you can do a monthly newsletter because you will know, you have the curriculum that's already laid out for you, would be able to provide that information for the parent.
And as we know, it's gonna look different for every level. We discovered today that there is a special education component that we can pilot for free. There are resources for students that have identified accommodations based off of their disability. So the 504 or IEP is going to be instrumental to them being able to move through the type of curriculum that it is apparent to be very heavy with Hampton City. It looks very different than even what the curriculum framework and Video Week looks like. So I believe when I went through, for me, going through this process, because it looked very different, I had to unpack. And because my area is math, I immediately went to math because I know math. And so it does look very different, but there are many areas of rooted alignment. There is alignment there, and where there is not alignment, the curriculum team and I have been in conversation about how that will look. And then, of course, with, the transition of new leadership, those discussions, right, are gonna continue, and how that looks over the summer.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Just
Yes, ma'am.
like with any new input of information, some teachers will be able to take this and run. And we gotta build it, and we built in a process where we'll utilize those teachers in professional development in-house to work with other teachers.
Yes, absolutely, there will be team leaders that definitely hit the ground running, like you said. But we also, discussed today in my meeting with Dr. Thomason, I'm gonna get those two confused, I can feel it. Dr. Thomason, from Hampton City, about professional development in August and what that will look like. And one of the things that we discussed is their team coming here on site. What we purchased includes virtual training. And so I told her I'd prefer to have in-person training. I think it's gonna be more beneficial to have their team come out here and present to our teachers and give them a really thorough, rundown of how to use the curriculum. You know, we have some seasoned veteran teachers that are very tech savvy. This is all technology. So we do have some that are going to need that hands-on training, on how to navigate this, because we will be honest with you, when we first got access to this, it was like going down a rabbit hole, because there are just so many links and resources available in this curriculum. So yes, we definitely plan to have our staff, have that staff development so that they are comfortable. And like you said, we're gonna have some veterans that are gonna know how to roll with it, so.
Get them some Southampton County peanuts and get them hooked.
I love
We
that.
can do that, Mr.
I think we can handle that.
And in addition to that, during this process, as you all know, we are a Virginia Tier Systems of Support school division, and so within that, we are required to look at all of our resources to ensure that they are currently aligned with what we are using in our curriculum. So Ms. Doyle, many of us, several principals, teachers, reading specialists, formed a committee to look at every program. As Hobbs, you mentioned this several meetings ago, about making sure we are not just putting aside things that are working well for our students. And so that process allowed us to look, using a deeper dive, somewhat of what I call a curriculum root analysis, to see, based off what teachers have stated, based off of student data, what programs we should continue and what programs we should not continue. So that process has been done through the hexagonal tool.
Yeah, I think, and some of that's related to the question I've got, or maybe the suggestion that I have, and is whenever you implement a new tool of any kind, so whether it's an evidence-based framework or things like that, the early reinforcement that we give and the early monitoring that we give is usually what helps us to predict success. And so I'm hopeful that over this summer period that we've got over the next couple of months, we can build in what our calendar of kind of check-ins with teachers is gonna look like, so that as we head through that first quarter, we've got some built-in check-in opportunities to see how is it going, where are our teachers falling off pace, where are our teachers staying on pace, and then also what is our assessment data looking like, and so that we're doing some of that early comparison with the information we've got available from those observations, from testing data, and from teacher feedback. I think we probably need to build that in so that we can then target where our interventions go from there's only a few of you all, right, that can jump in, but we can target the interventions to make sure that we're picking up how to use the tools here and making sure we're staying aligned, whether it's at Riverdale or whether it's at Capron, and that we've got the same product being delivered at all of our schools.
Thank you for that. Any other questions before we move on to the overview of our accountability calculations thus far?
Just a comment, and I think parents probably know this, but sort of piggybacking on what Ms. King was saying, that I think it's important for parents to understand that, you start with the SOLs up here, so we got these big things here, and And then the framework is just telling us how we're gonna make sure we cover the material that said we gotta cover. So I think that if we present it to parents in a fashion that they sort of understand how all the parts connect, I don't think parents want the nitty-gritty details that the data analyst has or that the classroom teacher has, but I think the parents want to know, this is the SOL. It says that, in 8th grade English, you're going to study literature from different cultures, of different genres or something. Okay, that's 8th grade literature thing. Okay, now how are we going to include that? And then that's when the curriculum comes in. Anything we can tell parents, we're going to study, American authors at this point. We're going to study, these people. But I think just giving parents this broad overview and then telling them, this is what we're studying. We're studying, American poetry this
Yeah, and
week.
if you wanna review it with your kid at home, you can find the information here.
Here,
Because
right.
I just relate it to like back when I was in school, you took the literature book home and you studied this unit, Parents still wanna be able to help kids, so they just need to know is it supposed to be in their binder, like just where is the information that they're supposed to be studying, yeah.
And to Dr. Goodwin's point, I think one of the most helpful things we can do is distill some of this complex information down into a simple infographic that says, big tier here, narrowing down to a focus where you get to, this is what we're learning this week, right? And if you can show that as a generic kind of infographic, then that's easier for then families to apply to the more complex items. And so we can do that by inserting also the names of the things that we've been talking about that can get very confusing for parents too. Hampton City curriculum, the KIDM use of this and blah, blah, blah. So that will help then insert those names and make all of it a little bit more general conversation.
And I do want to add that there is a bill, I believe it's in the House, that they are looking at possibly requiring the HQIM be the curriculum. So we've got to, kind of keep on top of that, and then a requirement also to use textbooks. So I'm doing the research on both of those as well, because we have to make sure that we're staying abreast of what the state expectations are as well. So trying to make sure we're staying on top of that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Which is gonna be a part of the next, presentation, the next part of the presentation, because to Ms. Doyle's point, it has passed out of the House and the Senate, that bill. The number, I can see it roll across my forehead, but I can't remember what the number is, but it's the HQ, the high quality instructional material, piece of legislation, which is gonna impact, the layer of questions that will come out of the National Testing Bank of Pearson. Now, Pearson, they have a bid out, Virginia Department of Education was requested to reopen the bid process for the testing bank. Right now we use Pearson, but that may not be in August. And so once we find out, we gotta shift and pivot really quickly, because the two have to match. So more information was coming, so thank you for mentioning that. Absolutely.
I have one more question. The schools division has a lesson plan template, right?
Correct.
Will this replace that template? Because it is a lesson plan. Because can you just cut and paste this information into your lesson plan template?
I don't think the format of the curriculum is an actual lesson plan format, so they would still have to do those lesson plans.
On the school's lesson plan, the division's lesson plan?
Yes, ma'am.
That was my understanding, but that was my understanding. Ms. Doyle, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to move into the overview of our accountability calculations, and as Ms. Bowe comes back to the podium, this is what our accountability and accreditation system looks currently. Accountability versus operational compliance. I've always defined it as, when they changed the model, things that we have to address as bullet points, and then the point system. So how do we identify ourselves? We currently have 2 schools that are distinguished. We have 1 off track, and then we have several schools on track. And so right now, we're still in the current system that was adopted, and we're going to just go through not only what it currently looks like with our data, but also I just want to be clear. I want to stop here and just say that the information that we're going to share, just want to be very clear to the public and those who are present, we are still in the middle of spring SOL testing. And so the data that we are going to review this evening is not what it may look like next week. We have not started expedites in several of our schools, and that also includes students with extenuating circumstances. So we have a goal of testing every student that has not been successful the first time based off of information that we receive out of their data. So, Ms. Bolt?
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be with you tonight to talk through some of these topics. Okay, so what you guys have in front of you is the graphic that we've seen over and over for the accountability system, but I do want to go ahead and just talk about the left-hand side primarily. The right-hand side is the accreditation system. That's our compliance checklist. The left-hand side, the key phrase is performance and then support. Performance is where we're talking about our growth. We're talking about our performance on SOL tests, which is mastery, and also on the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program, which is the VAP test. That's where the Access EL progress measures are, and that's where our readiness indicators like CTE 3E are. Also, that is where the federal support, and OSQ now renamed, but the former Office of School Quality, the state support, is tied to. This is a breakdown, and you actually have a handout of this in your folders as well. So this is the breakdown, elementary, middle, and high, of what those components are on a broad level. And then you also have about 1 by 1 each of those. Again, growth is now tied to a value table system, which you saw in that first slide at the very beginning of the presentation. VVAS was not funded for this year, so the VVAS system is not in play this year at all. This year it is a growth table system, and we're going to actually show you those growth tables tonight. This is the detail for the elementary school. So you can see those percentages there. You do see the note there as well that for schools with fewer than 15 ELP progress eligible EL students, the ELP category is removed and 5% is added to the growth categories instead. So for several of our schools, that's going to mean that the growth categories change from 12.5 to 17.5% apiece. In advance, thank you. Okay, same thing with middle school. At this time, we do not anticipate that the middle school will be adjusted, but will not be adjusted. Will be adjusted. So just to be clear, our middle school, we do anticipate will have the adjustment. Only one of our elementary schools may end up not having the adjustment for having fewer than 15 EL students. Okay, for high school, you'll notice the change there with graduation being factored into readiness, as well as the 3E framework, which is the CTE type framework. And graduation is in there twice. It's in there once for readiness, and that's the 6-year rate for a prior cohort, and then the 4-year cohort rate for the graduation component. Something to keep in mind that is different for high schools, that it's cohort-based currently. That's one of the things that's being discussed for change in the coming years. But currently it is based only on the 12th graders that are graduating in that current year. So when we look at this, we're not looking at the entire population of the high school for cohort-based information, just that one cohort. These are the performance categories. It's a 100-point scale, so it works very much like a regular 100-point grading scale. The distinguished threshold is 90 points. On track is 80 to 89, off track is 65 to 79, and needs intensive support is below 65. And those are the categories that Dr. Harris-Mohammed was referencing a few moments ago. You can see what those indicators are as far as the level of support. When we talk about mastery calculations during the rest of the PowerPoint, when we're talking about SOL, these are the performance levels that are tied to that. So something to keep in mind is that the expectation from the state is at minimum that each child would achieve proficient. But you can actually exceed that value by getting 1.25 points with a pass advanced. Basic does not meet is 0.75, and below basic is 0.25 for reading and math. Something else you should keep in mind is we are going to present work keys information. Work keys is a substitute test, and it is, as it says up there, used for verified credit, but it is not factored into the accountability system at all. This is for science. We actually went to the state to get some more information about this to make sure we're clear on that. So science has 3 levels for the accountability system, 1.25 for pass advanced, 1 for pass proficient, and 0.75 for does not meet. This year, grade 5 and grade 8 are being reported with 4 proficiency levels. They're using the fail below basic and fail basic reporting categories, but both of them are going to count as a 0.75 under accountability calculations. We do have that in writing from the state, which is what you see there. That's from the office hours. This is an overview of the growth system that is currently going to be used for 25-26, assuming that it is passed by the Board of Education in June. Like you saw in that very first set of slides, those changes, the growth table, and the alternate access exit criteria, are subject to passing in June at that VBOE meeting. So the way this works is there is a table which are going to show you those specific numbers, but if a student is advancing a particular number of ranges, either passing a crucial threshold like fail to pass, or crossing over from pass proficient to pass advanced, they're going to get the maximum number of points. Also, if they advance 2 or more range levels, they'll get the maximum number of points. If they advance 1 range level and don't otherwise cross one of those crucial thresholds, they'll get 1 point. For students that are moving back or staying in the same range, if they're moving backward and they end up in a failing range, ranges 1 through 4, they aren't going to get any points. If they move back 1 or more ranges and they end up in ranges 5 through 7, so either pass proficient or the lower half of pass advanced, they'll get 3/4 of a point. If they stay in the same range and it's a failing range, 0.5. If they stay in the same range and it's the low part of pass proficient, it's 0.75. Staying in the same range and it's 6 through 7, the higher part of proficient or the lower part of pass advanced, that's 1 point. And if they stay in the same range and it's the top range, then that's going to be 1.25 points. And the purpose of this, of setting it up this way, as per the state, part of the rationale, is to support all learners, including learners at the top end of the scale as well as the lower end of the scale, to give everybody a pathway to achieve points in growth and to achieve the maximum number of points as well. I do want to just briefly pause for questions because I know that was dense and that was quick. Are there any questions about anything we've seen so far before we get into data tables?
Well, I'll first say I'm dense but not very quick, and say that, can you remind me, did we also change, or did Virginia also change cut scores for where, like a pass and a pass advance fell? That was also part of legislation that, or some rules that came out from VDOE?
So they were. It was a lot of discussion, and it was on the tip of passing, but with the regional superintendents coming together, they have put that off. And so that was a part of Article 4. When the new governor took office, she immediately said, we need to pause a little bit and get some feedback from stakeholders, particularly regional superintendents out of each region. And so that happened. Will those cut scores go into effect? It's going to come back. I believe very strongly it's going to come back. However, right now, that was on a pause due to the governor's mandate.
So we only have 1 set of complex math to worry about right now and not 2 sets of complex.
Correct. Yes, sir.
More or less. One of the things to note, though, is that there is a cut score now defined for those 4-level science, because that was not previously in place. That may change, but that is currently in place, even though it's not affecting accountability right now.
Okay.
So these look a little different than the charts I've shown you before. So before I would typically show you two charts, and this combines the two charts so you can see the number of kids next to the percentage. So on the right you have the number of test takers on that right axis, and on the left you're going to see the percentage of test takers in the building. Please just note that the right hand side, that axis is going to change. The left hand side will always be out of 100%. So what I did here is, and you'll see this when we talk about the growth ranges later, but I've broken up the range of scores that we have in 50-point intervals, and just done a tally of the number of students that are in each of those. You can see a distribution of where they fall versus pass and advance, and pass and fail. This is for the end of course reading for the high school for fall. Take a look at that. Do you know if there's any questions on this one?
Just on the title, you've got end of course reading 2024, and then as of 2026, is that, what's the 2024?
2024 is the standards year.
Got it. Thank you.
Now, I do want to share that we have seniors, this is why we pull out the data. We have seniors who have not, if they have not passed their reading or writing, they are considered by the Office of Accountability and Office of School Improvement as a term graduate. And they are considered a term graduate because of reading or writing that they have not passed, or any SOL that they have not passed at the end of the first semester. So I'm saying this to say that that data that you're looking at now, when I had a disclaimer of it's going to change, because we have some students, some seniors in particular, that may not have taken the 2024 version of the test because they originally took the test when they were a junior. So it might have been a 2018 version, so they are allowed to do that, but the data is still factored in.
And the other thing just to keep in mind, and I'll say it once and I promise I won't bring it back up again, but this is not directly affecting our accountability out for this year outside of those term credits, because this is typically a test that's taken in 11th grade. And so they are not part of the graduating cohort for this year, which means they will not be part of the accountability calculations for this year. So just keep that in mind too. Okay, this is Algebra 1, 2023. Again, that is the standards year. And then the date, snapshot date, is the 25th. And the goal in showing you the distribution is to help you see not just the pass rate, but to also see that broader level of detail. That pass rate, you don't know how close, or how far a child is from a particular threshold. So this is designed to give you a little more detail. This is Algebra 2. Biology. Earth Science. Something to note is that Earth Science was on 2010 standards in the fall, and it has changed to 2018 standards in the spring.
And so, another disclaimer here, if I may. Students who have not passed the 2010 Earth Science, and they took a class when the 2010 was in effect, can continue to take that version until they master, or until they have ran out of those versions. And then, in order for them to take the current, they will have to have remediation under the 2018 standards. Particularly if they failed the class, they will have to take the class again and then take the SOL under the new standard. So as a DDOT, as a long-term DDOT, I would always say to the high school team, do everything we can when they're under the older version, because for them to change and adjust to the newer standard can be equally difficult, and the success rate decreases. So we try to catch them on the other end.
Okay. This is chemistry. World geography. World history 1.
And World History 1 falls in that category as well, having a 2008 standard and a earlier standard as well.
World history 2. Virginia and U.S. history.
another one that has different years. Okay.
This is the WorkKeys Workplace Document Substitute Test. Across the bottom, you'll see the criteria from VDOE for equating to a pass proficient and pass advanced. So a student needs to make a 4 on WorkKeys reading or WorkKeys Workplace Documents. We typically give WorkKeys Workplace Documents. So you can see the number of students in each of those categories. This is just a simple tally. This is the maximum score per student.
Ms. Bo,
Yes.
earlier you were talking about that we can use this substitute test, but it didn't count in something.
Yes, it works for verified credit. So if a child has taken the reading SOL and has not passed it, they can move to this test as a substitute in order to earn their verified credit for graduation. But this test is not incorporated into the accountability system. So if they pass this test, they will not affect our pass numbers, our mastery calculation for reading for their cohort.
Okay.
So a pass on WorkKeys does not equate to a pass for accountability.
Right, so we wouldn't get any points for
Correct.
those students in that, okay.
Yes,
I just wanted, that was what I thought, but
That's a lot, right, to take
It
in,
is,
yeah,
I
because
know.
the goal is the creation and improvement of the substitute test is to ensure that our seniors graduate.
Right.
And it's closely related to the current reading standards that they have. It's another opportunity. We also have it for math. We have students that do far better on an SAT or ACT, and then they don't have to take a math SOL because they have reached above that score on the SAT or the ACT.
only for the verified credit.
Only for the verified credit. Say that really fast 3 times.
Right.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And a lot of students with disabilities, the WorkKeys
Absolutely.
is a pathway forward.
Absolutely. As well as the other alternate tests for them and the special credit accommodations. Yes, ma'am.
So one of the things that I want to understand is, we've had some fall SOL data for a while, so these results, we've had these, assuming at least since the end of the fall semester, right? What alterations, because some of these same classes I'm assuming would be taught in the spring semester,
Yes,
what alterations did we make or work have we done to maybe try to see some improvement in areas where we had lower pass rates? So, if I was to look at earth science, for example, and to see a 54% fail, 59, 60% fail rate, how do we use that data to then influence the work we're doing in the spring?
So one of the things is that we look at, we use the student detail by question to help for 2 reasons. As a transitioning into this role coming out of the DDOT, it was 2-tier for me. What supports do the teachers need? Is it a best fit? And then how do we immediately move students in recovery, credit recovery, or course recovery, SOL recovery? And so we had to utilize that data to match with teachers who were stronger in other areas by question, by response, by answer. And so immediately the in-house tutoring occurred, and then also the after-school remediation occurred for those students. The sooner we get them at the end of the semester, research says it's fresher in their mind. Well, the longer you wait to capture their recovery, the longer in recovery they may be, because we've waited. So one of the things that I stressed as the DDOT at the time that was over testing was we need to remediate expeditiously so we can capture as many students in the denominator. And it's not about data, but when you're looking through my lens at that time, it was how can we increase the numerator so we can have, even though we are not looking at percentages anymore, but points, but the more students we have in proficient and above, the higher points we get. So it's a points system game, if you will. But to your point, Mr. Rogers, it was the high school immediately began to recover the students. We also looked at attendance. Ms. Bowden and I are going to talk about how that impacted many of the students not being successful the first semester and how they are being successful now. So they can pass the course, But if they failed the SOL and they need it for a verified credit, we have to recover them sooner. So my philosophy has been, do not wait a year. Try to capture them in the school year while it's fresh.
That answers, I think, part of my question, but maybe not the gist of what I'm after. So if Brandon taught earth science in the fall, and my pass rate for my class was a 60%, or 40% out of 100, then what support did I offer to, or what support did the division offer to Brandon so that he was better able to address what the curriculum standards were, what the SOLs were, so that we could increase that pass rate and we don't repeat, I don't want to say mistakes, but we, if you do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, that's the definition of insanity. So I want to make sure that we are taking this and then evaluating how we're teaching so that that can influence how our students are successful.
Yeah, so the beginning of this semester, I asked division leaders to be a part of, to report to schools to provide support. But because I knew the data, because I was DDOT, I knew what the data was looking like at the halfway, the end of the year. So we each had a school to work with curriculum in the school where we saw some areas of opportunity, okay? That was first. The second thing was ensuring that it was aligned. And so that's why the data, the teachers need to receive the data sooner inside the building. When they wait to distribute the SOL data and what they need to work on, it reduces that much time and opportunity for them to remediate quicker. Also, some staffing changes had to occur in the building with courageous conversations in terms of, if I am stronger in Algebra 2 and geometry, and there was a brand new teacher that had not had experience, we just partnered. We worked so they could add support. I asked Ms. Doyle to come back up, and I see Mr. Marshall is here because Mr. Marshall has been key, particularly with the area of history and on the middle school level, to ensure that it happens sooner in-house. So we did some internal changes to make sure that, based off of the data, just what we saw, what the data gave us, where those immediate needs were. So I hope I answered that part of your question.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm guessing in some of that there was, if we've got lesson plans and we see, standard 1 for earth science was one that we really struggled with. I'm hoping that we looked at what the lesson plan was when we were teaching standard 1 and made sure that we were reinforcing what we should be doing to teach that standard in a different way. So,
and that started with observations. Principals and assistant principals that we have on the secondary level needed to be in the classroom to ensure that the teaching was occurring with the alignment of the curriculum. So that had to continue, that had to happen. I asked Ms. Doyle to come back up because you mentioned lesson plan. That was another piece that we had to look at, was the alignment of the lesson plan. And, the focus cannot always be on where we are in the pacing sometimes, but where we are in the pacing, is that aligned with what we're teaching? And then what does the data tell us? What's the data story? And so a lot of that work Mr. Marshall was doing, as well as Mr. Nichols, who's not here, with who oversees the virtual component of our curriculum and instruction, as well as Ms. Doyle. You mentioned earlier the curriculum team is very small, but they're very mighty. And so we began to just expand where we needed to provide those additional support. So one, the observations needed to occur to ensure that what we were seeing coming out of the instructional practices, was also in line with what we need to see in our pacing. Ms. Doyle, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I want to just give a large shout out to our building admin, because they do a dynamite job of reviewing their data and doing all of those observations, and they're instructional leaders in their building. So we do trust them a lot with that information. I also want to say that data is key. And so I'm standing next to the amazing data analysts that we have, And she had created SDVQ sheets for the principals and the teachers to see exactly what areas are areas of
Tell me what
weakness.
SDBQ means.
Student detail by question, yes, SDVQ, yeah.
We have a lot of acronyms in public education for sure.
Do it in mental health too,
Okay.
so don't feel that.
But for me, you still didn't answer Mr. Rogers' question.
Okay.
Because I thought Mr. Rogers was saying that, for example, if in earth science, you saw that 60% of the students were failing. So you gave so I guess the first thing was you gave the data to the teacher. And then I thought his question was, so tell me the specific things that you did to make sure this teacher became more successful. He said first you did some observation, but I thought he wanted to know some of the specific measures you took to make sure that the teacher could be more successful. And so I was hoping to hear more of the specific measures that you took. So did you start reviewing lesson plans? Did you send in a co-teacher? Did you have, what specifically did you do? And I thought that was your question, Mr. Rogers. So
yes, ma'am, thank you. So with the lesson planning, we had to ensure that the lesson plans, again, were in alignment with what the curriculum that needed to be taught was clear. That was one thing we had to review that.
Make sure that somebody looked at this person.
Yes, ma'am. And that was on the work of not just the building principals, but also the curriculum team. Okay. Teachers, where we saw that the data was not where it should be, even above 50% in the 60 percentile, we brought in support from central office. I started saying I dispatch individuals from central office to work with teachers where there was areas of opportunity, and that were several.
What does that mean? What did they do when they got there?
So they supported the teacher in working with pacing, lesson plan development, also at the principal support as well. And so there was a team of things or a team of individuals that came together to always look at, is the teacher, is Dr. Harris Muhammad, if she's not on pacing, then the why. So observing, staying in the classroom longer with the teacher where there was area of opportunity, as well as following up sooner. Those things make a difference instead of waiting to talk about what your observation looked like and if it was in alignment. Also, the benchmarks. We began looking at if there was a alignment or misalignment in the benchmarks that we were assigning to our teachers. So sometimes it doesn't look the same for every teacher. It just depended upon what that teacher needed. First, we had to take a look at, well, what does that teacher need? And that came from them. They had to tell the team, well, this is where I think I need support. What do you think? And so listening was the first thing to see what supports they needed. And then we crafted a plan. Every plan didn't look the same for every teacher.
That was for the teachers. What did you do for the students, such as after-school tutorials?
Yes, ma'am. We had in-school tutorials during the day, and then we also focused heavily on after-school tutoring as well. And we also had some of our principals. We had 2 of our elementary principals who have a math background came over to the high school and offered up their time to remediate some of our students during the day. In the area, I believe it was Algebra 2 and Geometry. Then we had another elementary principal that went over to the middle school. We had a high school assistant principal that went over to the middle school to provide support with the students in terms of pulling some students out during the time that they had and working with some students because they had taught that curriculum before. So those are just some of the, and I know I'm missing so many of the great things that we put in place, but we didn't delay. That was one. We took our time looking at the data and what was needed, and then we looked at the gifts of individuals and their strengths, and then we dispatched them into those areas to ultimately support teachers, to ultimately support students.
Thanks for that. Whoa. Thanks for that answer. Turn that off. Thanks for that. I think that helps to understand what we've done. We'll obviously get some information on if that's been effective guess I wanna make sure also that all of us are coming from the same point, that we believe that our students have the capacity to be 100% pass rate on these big things. I mean, I know that might scare teachers in the room sometimes, because it's like, oh my gosh, am I gonna be held to 100%? But I think if we believe, and start from that framework, if we believe we've got 100% chance for success, then everything that we do to help align that curriculum, help to support the teachers, and then also help to think about how we're supporting the students, gets us toward that 100% pass rate. And some of what you mentioned is the stuff that has made Southampton successful in the past, and that's knowing the resources that we have internally and leveraging them in places that are other duties as assigned, right? And moving those experts around to help with that. I think what I'm hopeful for as we head into the next year is that if we already know these things, that we don't forget that we know these things. And that if we knew Brandon needed a little bit of support in teaching earth science, which I certainly would have. That was probably my worst science course in all of high school. I was lucky enough to sit next to my valedictorian in that class. And he was very helpful and instrumental in me learning about rocks and everything else I needed to know for earth and space science. I remember that class a lot. But that we would know that Brandon then needs those supports maybe heading into the fall semester again, and that we don't pull back just because we've entered a new year, but that we've looked at that plan for success and said, okay, we made this gain, how are we gonna continue to make those gains so we make Brandon ultimately a successful teacher until we see that he can maintain all of that on his own, and that we figured out what our students actually need. Because I mean, that doesn't mean Brandon was not a good teacher. It means that Brandon needed some help in figuring out how we were gonna get this standard ingrained into students, which is not an easy job.
And also scheduling helps with that. When you, to the point that you just made, and a lot of things that we have done have been duplicated in the past. And then there were some things that we said, oh, maybe let's look at this. And one of the things that we had to honestly look at was student scheduling. How we schedule them is so critically important to their success. So if we know from middle school that they did not pass a math SOL, then we possibly need to catch them in the second semester instead of the first semester of their freshman year, and provide some additional supports in the first semester of their freshman year, and then look at giving them the Algebra 1, or if they, particularly if they didn't pass Math 7 and Math 8, right? Then what is it that we need? Do we need to place them in after, early, AFDA, the Algebra Function Data Analysis, because that's an algebra-based math course that can help them be successful on the Algebra 1 math course. It is known that the Algebra 1 math course is the easiest of all the math courses because of access to Desmos. But if the student is not comfortable with technology, then we also need to make sure that in that after course, they are technology efficient. So those are a lot of the conversations that we have between the middle school and the high school in terms of scheduling. So that was also an added piece. We've done so many different things that I'm just coming back to the forefront of my mind, that all of this work has been led by not only our building admin, but also our teachers being able to say, okay, maybe 8.7b was not my strength, and graphing equations with multiple variables, but the teacher next to me had an 85%. Those are the type of conversations that we had, that sometimes sometimes it doesn't always come to the forefront of our mind, but that is unpacking the data to ensure that the alignment of curriculum is continuing to move student outcomes. So those are some of the many things that we have done, and sometimes we haven't always done it that way. But when you unpack it to the core of what that skill is, and you look at your teacher data, then you can make sure that even in the teacher support, that there is alignment. So we've done a lot of things. I'm just, sometimes I miss one or two things, but the principals have been great, and as well as our specialists that have been working hard to make sure that happens.
Yeah, I think everybody's working hard for that student achievement. I agree. Maybe this has been a lot of dialogue, and I'm sorry to get too in the weeds over stuff. I think it would be helpful to see this put together as a standard support framework. Like, this is the approach that we typically take, so that we see that written down as this is what we do, and it becomes a process that everybody's really aware of, and that we don't lose historical system knowledge and things like that about what's been working for this, and to make sure that we've got a standardized process so that we don't treat Mr. Grizzard differently than we treat Mr. Rogers, right? Like, that we've got the same kind of support framework in place to figure out where we can improve, and the way that we're evaluating that information. I think seeing that in this is our standard way that we look at support plans for folks would be a very helpful tool. I would think for the division, I don't want to see those tools necessarily on a granular level, but to know that it exists, this is how we approach it, and we can refine it over time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Doyle. Appreciate you. Any other questions on what we have shared thus far? It's been a lot of information, what I call data dump sometimes, but we just wanted to make sure that we were all aware where we were currently as a division. And at this time, one of the questions by a board member was, could you tell us where we stand in terms of accreditation and accountability? And we cannot, because we're still in the movement of testing and gathering the data. And that firmly would not come out. Historically, it has been sometimes in late August, but with the many changes, it could be October or November. But during our office hours with the Office of Accountability and Student Assessment, two separate departments at the State Department, they keep us abreast of what it could look like in terms of when they release that information. Will we have some early information? Absolutely. After summer school, we would definitely have some early information of what our elementary schools will look like and what our high school will look like without the summer school data. And then, but again, I would put the disclaimer that this is preliminary data. Okay.
And I just wanted to clarify, Mrs. Doyle mentioned the SDBQ sheets. Those are designed to help drive remediation. So those are sent out within 24 hours, typically at the end of the testing day, sent to the teacher, the admin, the testing individuals in the building. Those exist for 2.5 years now running, so that would be a longitudinal basis. But that does not take into account retakes and things like that.
It does not. So what Ms. Volk has done the past 1.5 years, almost 2 years, that's correct. But also, when students finish testing, the STC, School Testing Coordinator, can immediately print what that data snapshot looks like just for Shonda. And so Shonda can see not only her score, but the questions, low, medium, and high, where she missed, and where most of the points came from out of that low, medium, or high level. Yes. That's done inside the building, and it's sooner. All right, we're gonna move into a snapshot of what our spring SOL results look like currently. Again, this is preliminary data. I want the public to know this is not what it's gonna look like next week or June the 16th or 17th, but just what it looks like thus far. Okay.
So we have the disclaimer there just at the top that this is live data that's rapidly evolving as students make up tests and retake. And these should not be considered final results. You're going to see two terms here, PPP and PEP. They are two names for the same calculation. It's the state's percent of possible points. Typically it's calculated by summing points that we've earned and dividing by the number of students. We can actually exceed 100%, which is that 1.25 category for Mass Free for Pass Advanced, and there's a similar category for growth. So we use a couple of different terms for that, PPP and PEP. They're the same thing. Okay, so this is a growth chart. So across the bottom, you'll see that vertical scaled score range. A vertical scaled score range it's typically a 4-digit score. It's going to be a little bit different from the typical, 200 to 600 that we see. But it works very similarly. And in the middle, you have that same pass-fail line. Those are those ranges we talked about earlier with those growth pieces. So 1 through 4 is a failing score, and 5 through 8. 7 and 8 are pass advanced, 5 and 6 are pass proficient. And on the right, you still have that same axis, the absolute axis on the right and the percentage axis on the left. So you can see the number of students and the percentage of the total number of testers. That right-hand axis just ranges up to the total number of testers. This is the grade 4 reading cap for Capron as of the 25th of May. It's the same for Meher, same snapshot. It's not away, same snapshot. And Riverdale. This is now grade 5, and you'll notice there's actually quite a bit of a different shape from test to test, and that's one of the things that, just working in education, you hear from time to time. Test is a particular piece, but you can actually see that difference here in terms of the performance. Ms. Meher, grade 5. Anonymous. And Riverdale. This is for the middle school. This is for grade 6, the reading cap. This is for grade 7. And grade 8 reading. This is for grade 6 math for middle school. Grade 7 math. Grade 8, which comprises pre-algebra 7 and math 8. And then algebra 1, this is middle school testers only. Algebra 1 is the highest level that includes a vertical scale score. So our geometry testers are not reflected on these charts for growth. This is for science. As science is not eligible for growth, this is broken into 50-point ranges, just like the earlier charts were. Ms. Meher. No. Riverdale. This is Virginia Studies. Same logic, not eligible for growth, so we're looking at 50-point scaled score ranges. Ms. Meher. Nottoway. And Riverdale. This is the middle school civics. At the time of the snapshot, we had not done the physical science test yet at the middle school, so civics is going to be the only non-growth eligible test you're going to see for middle school. Okay, the next section is about how growth factors into accountability. Something to keep in mind is that fall and winter growth assessments do not contribute in any way to the accountability system, and there's actually chapter legislation that eliminates the fall and winter growth assessments for the next year. The growth component comes solely from spring SOL scores compared from year to year. Of course, we talked about the value table system that will be presented and looked at by the state at the June Board of Education meeting. And it is also possible, and it is currently being floated, that changes may be made to that system for 26-27, and the first review of those changes may also occur at the June Board of Education meeting. This is the table. So these are the actual numbers that we use to compare. You can see there's mostly a 4-digit score there, what those look like. And the goal there with the state's rationale behind it is that it's a single set of numbers that you can use to compare across multiple years versus, your 400 is encapsulated within the year that you are taking that test. And that's the value table from that. This is the growth flow chart, just another reference that's condensed onto one page. This is just some information about what those snapshots look like. Please keep in mind that transfer students who arrive during the year and do not have SOL scores from last year are not represented. They have to have 2 scores in order to be eligible for growth. So the denominators for our growth numbers may be different from the denominators from our mastery numbers. Also, we only use the highest score for each student, so for those contents that already had retakes by the snapshot date, those are incorporated and we use the highest score. And we've already talked about the dual access, so I won't tell you that again. Okay, these are distributions based on the number of students that achieved each number of growth points. There are multiple ways to achieve those, but this encapsulates those totals. These will be the foundation of our calculations when we estimate growth, once we're at a point where we can do that. And that is a significant advantage over the VBOS system where we had to wait for that number to be given to us. And this is something that we can estimate ourselves once we have a sufficient amount of data from our testing season. This is now grade 5. Okay. And Novel and Riverdale. Next we move into middle school. This is grade 6 reading CAT, just the growth point total tallies. Grade 7. Grade 8 reading. This is the grade 6 math CAT for the middle school. Grade 7. Grade 8. And that grade 8 again includes pre-algebra 7 as well as pre-algebra 8. And this is the algebra 1 middle school level. These are estimated PPP values, and just as a reminder of how that relates, PPP or PEP is multiplied by the total point value. So if something is worth 10 points, we would multiply 10 by, for example, for Capron, the 0.785, and we would say that that Capron would earn 7.85 points out of 10. I'm using 10 just as a simplification. The true values are in your handout.
And earlier when we were talking about the points and what is looking different, this is where we use the adoption of curriculum mapping to ensure that what is being taught and what is being assessed are in alignment. So that curriculum mapping piece and central office leaders modeling lessons is critically important, because stated many slides ago that this is a point system. They've gone to a point system, and we are encouraged to get the more students and the higher level points as possible.
And this is again very early data. Many of these numbers are pre-retakes. And we are in the midst of mathematics for elementary, which is why you do not have numbers for that yet over on the right.
So I want to start maybe with a positive comment, that there's some really good information here, and we see where we've got a lot of success going on. I'll probably shout out to Capron and say doing a wonderful job out there, and
I want somebody else to say it.
Yep, doing some really good work. Overall, I mean, I think at our elementary schools, we're seeing some strong performances we have typically seen in the past. And just so kudos on that work. And I know that we're putting in work at our middle school, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say, we're still seeing some places in the middle school math department in particular that we haven't seen. We're not seeing the growth that we would hope to see, and we're still seeing that big drop off in in the 6th grade year. That's the one that, to me, seems to be eluding us, that we're coming from really strong performance in our elementary school math departments usually. And we're hitting that first year at middle school, and we're seeing an instant drop in kind of growth and performance, right? So any thoughts at this point? I know this is preliminary data. It's not where we're going to end the year. 100% get all of that. Just curious if we've been able to put our finger on anything throughout the year that maybe we can be looking at as we head into next year and thinking over the summer that would improve that area.
Yes. Strengths, alignment of curriculum, having individuals understand what that Math 6 and Math 7 are very tricky areas of math, and some school divisions have eliminated teaching Math 7 altogether. So the 6th graders coming in from 5th grade can focus on developing those math, that onward from Math 5 to Math 6, teaching that pre-algebra. But a lot of that is understanding how can we curriculum map that curriculum. Also, the pacing must start early. You cannot pace through. So in other words, what do I mean by that? You cannot teach the plan, we have to plan to teach. And so that planning, that work of planning and ensuring that the alignment of the curriculum and that curriculum mapping is also directly in alignment with what that pacing looks like has to start sooner. So that's one. Also, continued supports. Once that first round of benchmark data comes out, even before that, the classroom assessment data comes out, that immediate remediation must begin instead of waiting until that 4.5-week benchmark. And so it may be the little things. It's not always a huge firecracker of things that can happen, but it's the little things that occur within the beginning of planning in your curriculum that helps increase the improvement of moving from, excuse me, a 5th grade overall math for the division, which has really been good historically, and then they move into 6th grade math. And so in conversations with Ms. Hutchison, our Human Resources Coordinator, the intentionality of what is your strength level in teaching from 5th grade to 6th grade? Also, the planning of the two must happen. So what do I mean by that? Your 6th grade math teacher should also be planning with your 5th grade math team. That is critically important. And so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was cutting you off. Go ahead, finish.
I was just going to say that is one of the things that I strongly recommend, that it happens, because the students, the data shows that they understand the 5th grade math curriculum. The data shows that. And then when they enter into 6th grade, there's a lot of things going on with 6th grade students. It's a lot, but also the adjustment from elementary school to middle school is a lot emotionally. And so one of the things that I think will help them in the coming years, that we have in-house supports now through a partner that will catch some of these behaviors, loose behaviors that impact their learning the first 9 weeks to almost 14 weeks of school. That may seem small, but it's huge. And so the other piece is thinking out of the box with a growth mindset of, okay, those who teach 5th grade math, can we come together with those who teach 6th grade math, and let's have a conversation? Because the reading specialists work together on the middle school and elementary level. That shows improvement, so that works. So we also should take the same template and do the same thing for the math. Those are my thoughts.
One question. I know that because the middle school was considered off track, then the division had to submit a corrective action plan, correct?
That is not correct. We did not have to submit a corrective action plan.
You did not have to do any kind of informal BBOE school needs assessment. You didn't have to do anything.
we were not required to submit any action of correction now.
But
It,
but did we do any, you know, whether we submitted it or not, did we do it? You know, in-house, did we start, when we said the school is off track, and I thought that with the accountability requirements, that if a school is deemed off track, then the next step is for the school to do, some kind of needs assessment to see what it might be. Did we do anything at the middle school?
so yes, they now, when I came in, what I can speak to is yes.
Well, no, I just want, if a plan exists, is there a piece of paper that says, we know we're off track, and this is what we're going to do to try to get back on track? Is there such a?
And that school accountability and improvement office works within that school improvement plan. We were not required, so they, in the levels of distinguished, on track, off track, and need support, we had, the first question that I asked the assistant superintendent of accountability in January was, is our middle school going to need comprehensive need support according to your definition? The response to me was no. But in-house, continue to implement what you have submitted through your school improvement plan, and that's what the middle school has done. Yes, ma'am.
So we do have something
Yes, ma'am, we do.
written down to say.
Yes, ma'am.
And, yeah, I'm gonna glance over at Miss Lane as I talk because she might be our resident math expert. But math is building blocks based, right? So if you don't know your addition facts, you don't know, it's hard to do multiplication if you don't know, all of these things. Everything has to build on one another. And so what you hinted at some of this when you were talking, Dr. Harris Muhammad, that our 6th grade and our 5th grade teams need to look together. But I think we probably need a bigger step than that, and that is to look at what are some of those building blocks for 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade math that we need to make sure are being taught well in addition to the standards that we're passing already in elementary school. How are we building that into our curriculum and leveraging some of that information so we're starting to lay the foundation for that math growth as we head into the middle school? If we know that one area is particularly weak for our middle school students, how are we looking at our elementary curriculum to augment that and give some extra teaching on those areas as we move forward?
If I can add, because I made sure with Miss Lane, 6th and 7th grade also have a non-calculator portion of the test.
And they don't have to know foundational.
And so, you know, if they've learned, you know, because I'm like, we were talking about algebra where they have the Desmos calculator, and you can teach them, you know, how to use that tool to help them as well. But on that 6th and 7th grade portion, when they have to do the non-calculator snags,
They have to know what 6 times 10 is. I mean, you know.
right? Or you're spending the whole time, and none of them want to write. Speaking as a former middle school teacher, none of them want to write anything down on the paper. And I tell the kids all the time, I'm like, I swear we don't tell you to do this because we like sit at home and try and come up with more work for you to do during the test. Like, there's a legitimate reason why we want you to use the scratch paper, you know. But even when they don't know I mean, I was an examiner this year for math, and you know, watching kids, and I'm looking, and they're like on their fingers, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you're like 12 years old.
The reminder of the chart is important, and that was to my point. The charts for the multiplication table, subtraction and addition, up to 100 and up to 200 are skills that are taught in grades 3, 4, and 5. And so, more so in grades 3 and 4. 5, let's remember what you did in 4. And so the spiraling back, the vertical articulation is critically important. That's why I use the 5th grade and the math grade connection, because that is a gap right there. To board member Tyndall and Lane, that calculator piece is important. When you give it to them in 3, 4, and 5, and then you get to 6 and 7, and 50% of the task is memory based. You have to know the skills in order to do well.
6 and 7, the part that you cannot use a calculator.
That's correct.
But 8, you can use the calculator throughout. So I still didn't see the scores going up. So that's a disconnect too, because you're using the calculator throughout.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So I think the rest of the board feels, but one of the things that I would like us to make sure that we're focusing on over the summer is that, we are better together, right? We certainly are. If we're better together, then one of the things that we need to take a look at is, as we're looking through Hampton City curriculum and we're planning out some of the pacing and making sure all of this is correct, how are we using the information we've got in testing to help influence what we're adapting the curriculum to, so that it paces correctly and lays the foundation again for 6th, 7th, and 8th. And then how are we also supporting our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers in their curriculum to make sure that as they're pacing and they're teaching and they're doing remediation throughout the year, that we're supporting them with the tools they need. So I would like to see a formal written response to how are we planning to enhance these scores, not just looking at the teachers themselves at the middle school, but division-wide to support the building or the growth as those kids are entering or leaving our elementary schools and moving into the middle schools.
And I do want to add too that a key component that we did add in the spring of this year, in the middle of this year, was you all may remember, the instructional coach. We do have that position. That has been a huge help at the middle school as well.
And I think, Mr. Rogers, what you are alluding to is like a systems approach, that not just look at the problem, but sort of come up with an overall systems approach to how we are presenting it and when we're presenting it. So just a system approach as opposed to a Band-Aid approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do we have a coach at the middle school level for math?
We have an instructional coach that is supporting that. Yes, ma'am.
So review it all, the systems approach.
Yep. We're not gonna. We won't make a 40% gain with one strategy, right? We need to look at across the board how do we start taking small bites that add up to a bigger bite. Yeah. I'm cognizant that we've been at this for about an hour and 40 minutes. I think Ms. Boger, this is I think the last slide that we had on testing data. Is this an okay place that we can take a 5-minute break just for our mental health? And if you guys wanted to grab, I think there's some Subway over there. I think that would be an opportunity to do that. But we could circle back here in 5 to 10 minutes.
My feet are very grateful. Thank you.
Can we adjust the AC? I didn't bring my blanket.
It's okay. Let me see what if you got to bring your blanket. Go ahead.
We'll start a small bonfire underneath your table.
And I'm usually never cold.
But I got to
fire over there, Mr. Williams?
I have the marshmallows.
All right.
Not we're not burning.
All right, so Dr. Harris Mohammed promised that we would be done with this in 10 more, no, I'm just kidding.
Well,
We will resume with discipline data.
Yes. Thank you, board members. We thank you so much for providing the grace and patience. I know we gave a lot of data. You have given us a lot of feedback. It's good feedback, and we appreciate the feedback. And so with the feedback, the first half of the presentation, we know what work stands before us, and we're gonna try to address with fidelity and 100% accuracy what your questions were, and keep you abreast on what that looks like. We're moving into now our discipline data. Ms. Bogue and I, again, we're team on our discipline data this evening. And a lot of the information, here we go again with acronyms for public education. But we are driven by through legislation, the Student Behavior Administrator Response. And so a few times out of the year, Ms. Bogue will review to upload through a system what our discipline data looks like. That is a requirement for us. We work very closely together as your hearing officer before coming into this role. I would keep that data in terms of what's the number of incidents that required an administrative hearing for our students. She's going to talk about what that data looks like from last year, what the data looks like currently this year, and I hope you will be pleased. Also, there are some categories that always some concern on the middle school level as well as the high school level, and what practices the building administrators have put in place. One of the things that you're going to hear either me or Ms. Bogue or both of us at some point in this part of the presentation will discuss the importance of accurate data and on-time data submitted in our student management system that we currently use as Power School. And so there are two areas that our building admin must be responsible for in inputting their data. That's incident reports that the State Department directly connects and pulls data out of. And then also for internal data collection is log entries. So a lot of pre-amp information there, but it's going to be very useful as Ms. Bogue and I go through the presentation together. And so again, thank you for your patience.
Something to keep in mind is that SBAR captures all administrative responses, not just suspensions. Its predecessor was the Discipline, Crime, and Violence Report, which was focused on suspensions. This is focused on capturing the whole disciplinary response data set. Also that it is not restricted to just school grounds during the school day, it's also school buses and school-sponsored activities. So this shows the total incidents by school. We're only looking at complete incidents, so anything that was in progress, had not yet been completed, is not going to be reflected here. So this is just a raw total of how many there were as of the 25th of May. And you can see the high school and middle school very comparable, in Riverdale, Meharon, Nottoway, Capron. Meharon, Capron, and Nottoway. So we have those totals, and again, that is pulled from Power School. Power School is where our incidents are housed, and those are entered by administrators as those incidents occur, and those administrative responses occur. This shows the top 6 SBAR codes, and we did the top 6 for each of the schools, and then also the division as well. This is the division total for each of these codes, the leading one being the BAP2, interfering with learning outside the classroom. Examples including excessive noise or interrupting the class. Second is being in an unauthorized area of the campus. And you'll see the note there that cannot be related to school or class attendance or non-attendance, so that is not necessarily going to be someone who is skipping school. That is unauthorized area. Third is BSC 14, that's fighting, resulting in no injury. Fourth is RB 11, unwanted or inappropriate physical contact. RB 9 is the fifth, using the slurs based on the actual or perceived race, ethnicity, color, national origin, citizenship, migration status, weight, gender, gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation or disability, any of those protected categories. BSC 31, the, anything creating an unsafe condition for students, staff, and our visitors to the school. So last year. And then we see similar patterns as we go, but we see the numbers, of course, change as we go from school to school. This is Capron. You can see those numbers are much smaller, but the spread of those categories. I won't read each of those to you, but that's the totals for Capron. Again, seeing behaviors of safety concerns, some relationship behaviors, and then some operational behaviors. In Raharian, we see some similar, BAP2 again being in the lead there, and then BSC coming back in, and BSO, not as much relationship behaviors there. For Nottoway, BAP2, again, some relationship behaviors and some BESO and BSO. For Riverdale, again, the leader is the same, but BSC and BESO primarily, not as many relationship behaviors there. Middle school, same leader, BSC, BSO, and then a relationship behavior there as well. The high school, BAP2, and then right behind is BSO, 16, unauthorized area. And then we've got some relationship behaviors, and then BESO and BSC.
Ms. Bo, do you have a sense for how this compares to data from last year?
So we'll see some of that information for suspensions in particular, but there are some significant differences. There are some upticks in the elementary level and also the high school level.
Thank you.
Yes. And that's a graph we can also provide at a later date if that's desired.
I think it would be helpful to see some year-over-year comparison to understand what the trends are around the schools, and then probably more importantly, how do we complement the positive trends and work on how we address the negative trends.
I have a very similar template from last year, so it's very doable.
Thanks.
Of course. This is actually year over year. Dr. Harrison, how would you just look back real quick? I just want to make sure I get those qualifications out there. So this represents the number of students marked with the SUS attendance code. And so this is one of the internal validation measures that we do is we look at attendance and who's marked with a suspension for attendance, and we compare that to our numbers for SBAR, the number of out-of-school suspensions loaded in SBAR, to make sure that we're accurately reporting everything. And that's part of what Dr. Harris-Muhammad was referencing earlier when she was discussing that emphasis on accuracy. So this is just one of those pieces that we do actually have a year over year ready for you for the SUS attendance code. It does include all suspension days for the school year. And we also looked at average days per suspended student. That's just a simple average. It's the total suspension days for the school divided by the number of students that had at least one day of SUS coded to them. May 12th is a reasonable comparison point because we missed a similar number of days due to snow this year that we did last year. And this is again evolving data. This is something where administrators are actively updating attendance and SBAR codes as we go. So, all right. Yeah, perfect. So this is the number of suspended students. So this is the number of students that have at least one day of out-of-school suspension. Compared from last year to this year. Blue is 24-25 and the purple is 25-26. Both up to May 12th of that year. And that's where we see that uptick for the elementary schools there, with the exception of Riverdale, that slight decrease. Middle school is significant decrease, and the high school is right about the same. There's some very slight changes in some of the other metrics for the high school that are increases, but the number of students is identical as of May 12th. Any questions on that graph before we pop to the next one?
Chairman Rogers, is that something that you were just thinking about, the year-to-year comparison? And we could actually do 3 years if that's something that the board wanted to see. Because the SBAR codes changed over time.
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is definitely helpful for understanding, because I can't remember the last year's, the codes that we had from last year. Suspensions, obviously, this kind of a comparison is a helpful one to look at, and I see the next couple of graphs have similar shots. So if we can look at 3 years, if they're the the same codes for 3 years, then I think that's helpful to put all that information on a singular graph, and we start to understand our trends as a division. I think that's ultimately what we're after when we think about what are we targeting for improvement.
Can I jump in real quick? So the entire purpose for SBAR, like you said, in going away from those incident response and the discipline, crime, and violence, was because the state wanted to be able to say, at X school, there were, 50 times in a week or 50 times in a month that an administrator had to respond to some kind of behavior. And then to be able to show that suspending kids wasn't all we did. So there are codes in SBAR for, and there's a ton of them, for, from no action to call the parent or conference with the student or, that kind of thing. And I find it, the totals that you had, like, don't go back slides, but when we had like the top 6 SBAR codes, those are for the year, correct?
Yes.
So if those are the top ones, like just say, for example, Marin, and I'm not picking on you, Ms. Fowler, I promise. It was just the slide I landed on. But there's like 20, 22, like 23 maybe on there. I love our children, but there is no way that in an entire school year, an administrator only had to get involved 23 times. I've been an elementary school principal. There's just no way. So, yeah, I just have some, and again, as an elementary principal, I know that it is very difficult, and as any principal, you're dealing with these things, and SBAR is a beast to put stuff into. There's 82 steps, and if you miss the third one, you don't find out until the very end, and then you gotta go back. That's true. And so I know that it's very time intensive, but I just want to make sure that we have processes in place if the principal or assistant principal does not have the time to enter stuff in SBAR, that there is someone in the building that can, so that we're getting the most accurate data, so that when we're sending it to the state, you're not only, because I think what happens a lot of times is it's those big incidents that end up getting put in, and I sat and I conferenced with these 2 or 3 kids in the hallway, and it was whatever. Technically, I should be putting that in SBAR, but it doesn't get done. And then the state's looking at it going, you had 50 incidents and you suspended the kids 45 times. Well, yeah, I suspended kids 45 times, but it really wasn't 50 incidents. It was like 250 incidents. So I guess I'm asking to make sure that we have some kind of process in place to support our administrators in truly having accurate SBAR data. So it really wasn't a question.
And I can say that I do go out to principals and I meet with them. I do periodically send them updates, but there are certain categories that I don't have an internal control for, and something like a parent conference would be an example for that. You're looking at one of my controls right here, which is checking attendance for suspension. We also have the ISS codes, so I can check those. But there is no code for a parent conference. So I do, move out there and I show principals and work with them on a support basis to make sure they're aware of what their count is. And they also, of course, have access to that through Power School. We also emphasize that in division leadership meetings that I've presented before, just to provide a snapshot of where everybody is, to make sure it's back, at the top of everyone's radar.
Yeah. And then also, if I may add, the behavior intervention codes, building leadership, because we don't know from central office. Ms. Bo will not know if it was a 1 parent contact, if it was a parent involvement with the intervention plan in code 2, code 3, if they referred to specialized program or something like that. I think it's like 12 or 13 codes, it's behavior intervention codes that will help also guide what the outcome was along with the SBAR code that was used, for whatever incident that was. So it's a lot of cross-referencing, through the process. And so I just want to be clear that, Ms. Bowe does, when she and I meet to talk about, even when I was serving as the hearing officer, what it was looking like with the data, make sure that the data I was collecting and seeing was accurate with the data that she was having to upload, which also had to go out and meet with the building admin who has to verify that the information is put in correctly. So, any process that involves people can always be strengthened. There's always opportunities to make sure that, in between the check and balances, that before we upload the data, this is why she checks. To Dr. Tyndall, to your point, making sure that there's the support there, to ensure that what we are collecting is accurate. So thank you for that.
And I don't.
And I see part of you, so I'm gonna leave.
No, you're fine. I know, it's like, and I don't want any of that to have sounded like the administrators were not doing the best that they could, or that, I mean, the data that you have is incredible. It just struck me, and, like I said, then going back to my time in the building, and it is very difficult. And if there were some structures that we could put in place to be able to help them, maybe even lead teachers, or, somebody.
And you're absolutely right, there's inherent challenges in a lot of those categories.
Yes.
And believe me, it's something I've come to grips with annually.
Yeah.
Because it's
Just the time of it is.
Right, it's a lot, and it's at least 6 that I can think of that mirror each other. So sometimes building administrators are like, well, which one do I use? Because the part of it is equated to another SBAR code, and then we do a deep dive and we just look at which intervention they put in place and exactly mirror down what the student did. So it is a lot of discussion.
And in the past, we absolutely have seen shifts where a new administrator comes in and one code falls out of favor and a similar code comes into favor. And it's not necessarily because the source decreased, but because it changed categories. That's something that when we do the year by year for the cause, you'll be able to see that shift.
I just have a comment. I know Riverdale is slightly larger, has, more special populations, but their numbers are quite much higher than the other elementary schools.
They're the largest elementary school in the county,
yeah,
so that's one factor, but also sometimes it's multiple students that have violated multiple. Yeah.
I think, I was scanning ahead, Ms. King, so, you'll have to forgive me, but I think one of the things that stands out though is, while those numbers are maybe a little higher, if you look at when we get to the 24, 25, 26 total days of suspension, Riverdale's down significantly this year in total days of suspension. So while we might have had kids, that we had numbers of kids, I don't want to jump ahead on Miss Bogue's.
I was just looking at incidents,
Yeah, and that is important, just to, unique incident could involve multiple students, and the graph we're looking at now is just counts of students. Each student could have been involved in multiple incidents, or could only have been involved in one. So one chart doesn't, capture both of those.
And that's why I said what I said. It could be Shonda did 7 different things.
Bad. You've been acting up all school year.
Acting up all school year. In my full authentic self. No.
Yeah, consistent, but.
Well, and that's important to realize too when we look at the total days, because the same thing applies.
Absolutely.
So this is a percentage change, and so this is trying to address the challenge that we actually just talked about a little bit, that we do have some different schools that I think Riverdale's enrollment currently is either at or higher than the middle schools. So you're looking at, certainly a different population size compared to the other elementary schools. So this attempts to put all of them on equal footing. So that's where you see that tiny increase there for the high school. We've got 3 different series here. So we have the percent change in the number of students that received a suspension, at least 1 day of suspension. We've got the percent change in the total suspension days assigned for the whole building for that time frame, and the percent change in the average suspended days per suspended student, which is again just that simple average. Total days divided by total students. And so we see the biggest decreases there actually at Riverdale. Biggest increases at Nottoway and they had a relatively small increase in terms of absolute numbers, but percentage-wise, because their numbers were small originally, you see this larger percentage increase. So this is a chart to be taken in context only, but I did want to try to show you that on equal footing so that we control for that population size a little bit. So you can see those, and you also see some interesting splits, like an increase in the number of students at Meharon, but a decrease in the average suspension days per student. So you do see some interesting differences there too.
And in addition to that, one of the things that we were intentional about that I am hoping we can also do for the secondary levels that will really provide that additional support to the high school is that we added an ISI into it. Where I was before I came to Southampton, we called the individuals in-school suspension coordinators, but the in-school suspension interventionist, ISI. Here, we helped reduce some of those numbers as we're gonna go into, which applies to this and the slide before on the elementary level. It's the ISI person.
All right, so this is the day total, again up to May 12th, and so this is just taking all those days together and adding those up. And you can see that large decrease for the middle school, large decrease for Riverdale, some increases or static numbers in some other places there, like Meharon, Nottoway had that increase there. Small on an absolute scale, but percentage-wise, as you just saw, that's a little bit larger. And then high school, a small increase. Then this is the average suspension days per suspended student. So the goal of this chart is to reflect how many days on average are being issued per suspension. So if I'm a student that is suspended at this school, what is my most probable length of suspension? And you can see there's some dramatic changes there on that large decrease at Riverdale, for example. You've got a decrease there at Cape Ren, decrease at the middle school, slight increase at the high school, slight increase at Nottoway. Decrease at Meharon as well. Okay, we do also just have some hearing office statistics. Dr. Harrisman, do you want to address these? Because this is kind of your lane, or do you want me to?
Sure, this is the passion of my life. The school division has always taken the position that students are better when they're in school, and I think we all can agree, but there are times where they can't be because of their behavior. And so last year, this time, there were 72 students that had been referred or were referred to the hearing office. Now, in that data, some of those students also appealed and went to the student discipline committee, also repeated coming to the hearing office, okay? Compared to this year, this time, it's 37. I think that we are doing much better in the building with allowing the administrators to implement things in-house to keep kids in school for skipping class, wearing their headphones, using their cell phone when we know we have a no cell phone policy. And so in years past, it was and I pushed it because it was enforced, a zero policy for certain level of behaviors, which also, there are certain behaviors that they have to come to the hearing office for, assault, things like that. However, what has changed? One of the things that has changed is reviewing the expectations for administrators to also review expectations for the students. When I moved into this role, I asked administrators, particularly on the secondary level, let's meet with your kids. Do another grade level meeting to talk about your expectations because they've been home for a couple of weeks after the winter break. Also, we're moving into that season where their personalities are really going to change. So just begin talking about expectations and just making space and including the process of the family assessment planning team so students can get back to school sooner. One of the things that have helped us, school board, and I'm so grateful, is that you all said, okay, we recognize that our students deal with some mental health challenges, and what can we do to provide some supports in-house? And so you supported that, and that number reflects that support, is what I'm trying to say. And so when appeal meetings are held, when families use existing procedures and they request the team approach, when they request the team approach, sometimes we pull in others from behavior support, we pull in their medical team to talk to us about their level of, where their behaviors are coming from. A lot of those things were not happening before, but they're happening now. And so that has really reduced the number of students coming to the hearing office. So, thank you.
And that's what the slide shows. Sorry, it went down. All right. Okay, so.
So I think Dr. Turner's gonna have to come to the hearing office. Dismiss with technology.
See you next year.
So we're now, the other point of reflection, as well as this is also a BTSS goal for the division, is our absenteeism data, and that's what we're moving into next.
All right, I'm going to give you some state steps and language. I will try to be brief. All right, so these are the steps for calculating chronic absenteeism. The first thing you have to do is figure out whether the student has been a member at the school for at least half the school year. If that is true, then you look at their rate of days. So you look at the rate of their days absent divided by the total days at the school they are in membership for 50% of the school year, and you see whether that value is 10% or greater. So if I am attending a school and I'm there for 100 days of membership, if I have missed 10 or more days, I'm chronically absent. That's it. That's what those steps are. To do the absentee rate, you do the same thing, but just look at the school and see how many students are chronically absent. It is a reverse calculation in the accountability system. So rather than starting at 0 and adding up toward 100, you start at 100, and the more chronically absent students you have, you subtract from 100, which means you cannot exceed 100 for chronic absenteeism, which makes it unique. This has a quote from the School Support and Performance Framework. I will just remind everyone that we don't have an updated version for that for 25-26, but we anticipate, and the state has told us that they anticipate having one after the June board meeting once they pass their final changes. So you have the quote there for what that looks like. We used a denominator of 174, which included snow days where students were fed and offered asynchronous instruction, but did not include snow days where students were not fed. So 87 days is that 50% threshold for us. The other thing is just to remember that the 10% chronic absenteeism threshold is relative to the students' enrolled days, not the school's membership length. So that's potentially different per student. However, the general threshold we're looking at there is roughly the 17.4 days for a fully enrolled student.
And this does not include our students that are medical homebound.
Correct. There are some exceptions, which I believe they have a slide on that as well. So SRC flexible instruction is a way that we get a refund essentially back on our chronic absenteeism days. There are particular rules, which I won't read to you, but in summary, as for the gist of it, you have to simulate the regular classroom environment, in-person, licensed teacher, normal pupil-teacher ratios, things like that. But they must occur outside the normal school hours, so our in-school tutorials wouldn't count, but Saturday school, after school, or before school tutoring would. Those hours are calculated up submitted to us in the technology department and submitted to the state via the SRC end of year record collection, student record collection. And that calculation is then done by VDOE. We do not adjust attendance by hand in any way on our side in the student information system. That's done by the state on their side when calculating our chronic absenteeism. It is important to realize that the data I'm about to show you, therefore, does not factor SRC flexible attendance in or flexible instruction in any way, because that part is not concluded yet. That's more information about that. I won't read it to you, but the most important piece there is that 3 hours of in-person flexible instructional time essentially counts as 1 day of chronic absenteeism reduction for SRC flex attendance. This is the exceptions about home-based instruction. So students receiving home-based instruction are excluded on the days that they receive that instruction. Students receiving homebound for medical illness are excluded entirely. Okay, so these are the calculations that we have. So this is the number of students absent 10% or more of their total membership as of May 1. This is a monthly calculation I do, and that's part of our VTSS piece with the goal there. So I do run that division level data monthly, and that's a spreadsheet that everybody on that team has access to, as well as the VTSS folks that advise us. So that's the value that you have up through the end of April. And that's the number of students that qualify. This is that number represented as a percentage of the enrolled student body that were there for at least half of the year. So again, just that 87 or more.
Any questions on the attendance data?
Yeah, I think probably the same comment about this as I had around suspension and discipline data is that I'd like to see the year-over-year comparisons would be helpful. I'd also like to know how many of the students have been involved with Mr. Boone and maybe the impact that has had on attendance throughout the year. So where have his interventions been applied?
And that's something where I do have that data for the past 2 years at minimum. So that should be pretty easy to pull together for me.
Do we have a sense where Mr. Boone's impact has been the most? I mean, is he focused on predominantly the secondary schools, or just curious about where most of his efforts are?
One of his impact has been being a part of the FAT, the Family Assessment Planning Team. That has been critical because before that was a missing component in terms of our division social worker and also our attendance clerk. Also, with Mr. Boone Mr. Boone continuing to be a part of the meetings within the county, where they have the Deputy Commonwealth Attorney, other representatives from Franklin, Isle of Wight. So that committee, they talk about the challenges that our students face that keep them out of school as well as discipline, okay? Also, he does home visits a lot with the division social worker when students are 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. He's documenting those visits because of the work that we're doing in Virginia Tier Systems of Support, and attendance is one of the goals that the division leadership team adopted and supported. We also created, with the support of Mr. Boone and Ms. Bowles, a chart, a running spreadsheet that identifies the students, excuse me, with an identifier, also the number of days, so he can see the tracking of has it increased, has it reduced, and then the strategies that has been implemented. And so when we look at the year-to-year comparison, and also understanding what the role was entailing, what is it that we needed him to do and focus on to support the decrease of students being chronically absent. He supports the students by attending court when he's asked to attend, when it does rise to that level. Even when it does rise to that level, because Mr. Boone is not only loved by students, but also the adults that he works with, he maintains the relationships to follow up where those students are. We have had several instances where students, based off of the judge's decision and the supports that were put in place, they decided that the student needed to go to foster care. Mr. Boone is still connecting with that agency just in case the student comes back to us. That also had not happened in the past. So earlier I was stating how sometimes it's the small things that turn into big results, and it's those small things that turn into big results.
Thanks, Dr. Harris Mohammed. That's all I wanted.
You're welcome. But we'll have that data for you. All right, so now we're looking forward. So where are we going into the 26-27 school year with some legislative updates? We're going to talk about that a little bit. Some of the things that it's beyond our control that we have to implement. And so as the transition occurs, I will make sure that the board continues to know the legislative updates as well as our incumbent superintendent, because a lot of things are happening quickly in the month of July. And so we just want to make sure that we're on a good foot when those things come down. So we're going to talk about those a little bit.
And you have a handout that goes with some of
We
these.
put it in your folder.
So everyone's got that kind of blue handout. That is from the state that outlines their proposed changes for 25-26, 26-27, and then 27-28 and beyond. You're going to see snippets of that up here on the slides as we go through. But I just want to make sure you're aware you have that to refer to too.
So the JLARC study, the Joint Legislative Team or Committee, the Joint Legislative Committee that was formed, has been in practice for several years, is not only the committee that looks at the funding of the K-12 public system in Virginia. They were also tasked to look at the rollout of our accountability system and the abrupt change in the middle of the academic year last year. And so Ms. Bogue and I are going to discuss the impact of that came out of the school performance support framework model and what that means for school divisions next school year. I just want to share because we do have a lot of connected educators on the school board, which I think is magnificent. One of the things that is an uproar right now is that SOL testing next year, minus certain categories of students, can only occur the last 2 weeks of school. We may need to look at our school calendar, and that will be a recommendation, because that impacts extenuating circumstance of students, the expedites of students, and a little bit about term grads. So our calendar, which was approved, and I'm not saying it has to be changed, I'm not saying that, but we have to also look at our instructional calendar as well in terms of how we're going to test our students. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Ms. Bowe?
And so this chart that you see here, this is just really explaining what JLARC found and some of the things that they recommended. The full report is available at the top. It's an interesting read if you have the time to go through and take a look at what they said and why they said it. I just chose one of the more dramatic graphs to kind of give you a sense of what they were looking at, but you can see the difference there in the categories. Elementary, 17% were distinguished, middle, 9%, and in high school, 65% of schools in the state were distinguished. And so what they're looking at is ways to try and level out some of these pieces and parts to make the system work more as it is intended to do and be more transparent and easier for people to understand. So we'll take a look at some of those, but just wanted to explain what that chart was. HB 643 and its Senate companion state that VBOE shall consider the following changes from JLARC. And in your handout, you can see how VDOE has divided up those changes in terms of when they expect to implement those. But these 10 points do take into account what those look like. So one is just new performance label terminology. Right now we have needs intensive support, off track, on track, and distinguished. The recommendation from JLARC is that it become more of a continuous scale, like exceeds standards, meets standard, partially meets, and does not meet, so that it's a clearer line through to that. There are some changes, technical changes into how you can achieve particular categories if you're federally identified in particular categories. Those were some of the categories Dr. Harris-Mohammed mentioned earlier. None of our schools did fall in the CSI, TSI, and ATSI. But there are some changes surrounding those categories and what they're allowed to have in terms of the different categories. Another recommendation is reducing from 0.75 to 0.5 the points awarded in a master and index calculation for students who do score in that failing category for 3 performance level style tests. So for example, some of our EOC tests, that would apply. It would not apply to the science test if it remains on a 4 level for 5 and 8, if it remains on a 4 level status like it is currently. They also wanted to rebalance the weight assigned to growth, at least equally with proficiency, to more fully account for growth and make that factor in more intensively. They wanted to cap the total number of 3E points, and that's directly related to the graph that you all saw in terms of students were able to get many points as a single student, able to get many points in several categories there. Revise the method for 3E enlistment. And that's something that they've detailed in prior meetings. Establish a performance index rather than simple pass-fail for ELP. Right now it's a pass-fail indicator. And to, instead of redistributing ELP indicator weights to growth only, to redistribute them equally across all the categories. And then there's some changes around excluding, if you can go back one slide please, thank you. Excluding certain recently arrived English learners from certain tests based on the time frame. And then establish a timeline for the scoring thresholds, and that's partly tied to what Dr. Harris-Mohammed referenced earlier, which is that development of a new assessment system potentially in that bid for Pearson being out there. This is a list of just a few other legislative items that may be of interest. This is by no means everything that got passed relative to education, but there are a few things that are of note relative to accountability in particular. Eliminating the 3-year growth assessment system, so that's the fall and winter growth. It's that first one, HB 199. It has the Senate companion as well. And these are chaptered legislative updates rather than continued. HB 299 is the one that requires SOLs to be administered in the last 2 weeks of the school term for grades 7 through 12. The asterisk there, I will say, currently we've sought guidance on how that would apply to 4x4s, and currently that's in process, but the assumption is right now that that would apply to the school term. So our 4x4 students, it would be the last 2 weeks of the semester. That's the intent, is our understanding. Term grads and VAP testers are exempted, so our term grads would be able to test earlier, our VAP testers would be able to test earlier, and there's certain other exceptions that are embedded in that bill. There is a requirement that SOL scores account for 10% of the student's grade, but there is a delay built into the language that prevents that from taking effect next year. HB 1243 requires the use of expedited retake scores for growth calculations if they are passing. 1283 requires VDOE changes to graduation requirements and diploma pathways to apply only to students entering 9th grade 1 year after the change is made and beyond. So if they make a change in 26-27, it won't apply to anybody currently in high school. It would only apply to students that entered 9th grade the following year. And that is designed to put that into law. And then HB 410 requires participation in SAT school day. So that will be something we need to do this year. Which just, and that involves doing the SAT during the school day, on a particular day, and the PSAT as well, potentially, and there's language in there encouraging those to happen on the same day.
And that test, remember earlier I stated, is an approved, alternate test, and so it is a plus to that, just in case kids do not do well on the other test.
So this is a snippet from that handout that you guys have, the 27, 28, and beyond. So just to kind of give you a sense, this is how they're breaking it up. On the left, you see the change for consideration. On the right, that additional detail. I did not go over all the additional detail in what I presented to you, but that's why I wanted to make sure you had the handout. That way you can take a look at that. They do have some asterisks at the bottom about the changes and what that will require. And that can give you a sense of how long it might take for some of those changes to come into effect and change the landscape that we're working in. So that's continued on that. Yep, and that is the very end. So thank you so much for listening to me and asking great questions, and I appreciate all the questions you did ask.
Thank you
Are
all,
there any
board members.
other questions for me?
Ms. Bo, thank you, wonderful job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just looking at the, ending with the legislative updates as well as the JLARC study. So certainly legislative updates are legislative updates, but JLARC tends to make a lot of recommendations as they're assigned to study things, but they don't always align with what subject matter experts in the field, like the VDOE, may have. Do we have a sense for where the VDOE might actually stand on the JLARC recommendations and what we might actually see come to fruition versus that's a recommendation from JLARC. Thank you for your input. We'll see you next time.
The intent, the temperature, board members, right now with that study is a lot of that information will be adopted over time. And so, of course, every governor in Virginia only has a 4-year term. And the first year is always, sometimes, I'm not gonna say always, but the first year is making adjustments to the previous governor's budget that first year, which has yet to be approved. I just wanted to share that. And so there is some warm temperature, particularly before I left that role. It was a strong understanding that this was coming down the pipe and many of the suggestions would be adopted and have been adopted in the Senate. However, the question was, where's the funding coming from? Because whenever JLARC makes a study, there is not a line item to how this will be funded. So some of the information that we see here under legislative updates were out of what the JLARC study said that needed to happen, except the SAT school day that came out of a particular delegate that is an educator, senator that is an educator, and felt very strongly that this would help our students get into different colleges and universities and things of that nature. And so there's always a history and a conversation that is happening. So to your point, Mr. Rogers, I do see a lot of weight on some of the information. However, here's the caveat to that. If we don't have the funding, if school divisions, if the Virginia Board of Education does not have the funding to distribute to the school divisions, we cannot legally be held accountable or liable for implementing the information because we don't have the funding to do so. So I would say 90% of their recommendations is tied directly to funding.
Thanks. I think that's helpful. I think what I've often seen with recommendations from JLARC, that particularly things that would want to change the distribution of where we're falling in the scale of distinguished, on track, off track, all those kinds of things, trying to level out essentially a bell curve, maybe look at what you might look that is really pretty in a data world is not always reflective of real life. And sometimes I've at least seen in the Virginia behavioral health world that sometimes we have this really hard time telling ourselves that we are doing a good job at the work that we do. And so while we've got 65% of our Virginia high schools in a distinguished place, maybe that's not reflective of true success, but I think sometimes we run the danger of just looking at data there and saying, oh, there must be something wrong because we can't be doing that well. JLARC has sometimes had that capacity. So I think it's monitoring that and understanding how that's going to impact what we actually see in true change is going to be important for us as a division. It's nice to have the study results so we can begin to prepare, but I think we should also be doing our part in advocacy around just because we see good things doesn't mean that we necessarily have to change to make us not look as good, or that it's not reflective of the true quality of education that's being provided across the Commonwealth. That's all I've got to say. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. And I couldn't agree more. So, thank you again, board members. I know this was a wealth of information. It was a lot of data dumping. I have received additional feedback, and we will work as a team to make sure that those questions that you have provided will be addressed at our next meeting or thereafter for future reference. But thank you so very much, and just want to, again, before we close out, to thank the team. I want to thank the curriculum team, Ms. Doyle and Ms. Bold, and the technology team for the teamwork that we did. It was not one person coming together. It took multiple people being assigned to different things and coming together as a team to make sure that we were on one accord, on one page. So I just want to thank them so very much for the work that they did. Thank you.
Mr. Bryce, may I make a comment, please?
Yep.
As always. But I do want to thank you for all the data that we received tonight. You know, I think that we received a lot of data and a lot of information about how the data is calculated to be reported to the state, and I appreciate receiving all of that. But for me, when I think about data, I always think about data as the what. But when we think about building an effective student success model, then we think about the so what. And then so I'm hoping and that when we meet in August, the superintendent will give us some ideas and some direction in terms of what we're doing to use this data to build this effective student success system, and looking at it as a systematic approach to building student success as opposed to just trying to correct a Band-Aid approach. So thank you for the what, which is the data, and now we'll move to the so what, which is the plan, the action that we hopefully will get in August.
Yeah, that's really well said, Dr. Beaton. I appreciate that. Other board members that have any comments, questions? We started conversation around student wellness policy earlier, so we've heard some feedback on that back for Dr. Harris Muhammad to take back. We'll look at this policy, I'm guessing, again in our June meeting. Is there any other additional feedback now? And if there is, we can talk about that, and if not, I'm sure Dr. Harris Muhammad can take some feedback via email in between and bring back some of those tweaks.
Ones too. And I will include the goals that you all currently have as a board, and then you all begin to make adjustments and see fit in the near future. Yep.
Well, yeah, the goal that pertains to the physical activity, right? Not all of our goals, but the goals that pertain to these policies.
So, and I will get clarity, but during the webinar that I attended with the VA last week, not only are the goals for the division, but also to identify, and that's why Mark Ruffin, our food service supervisor, is also going to assist in identifying what the goals are. You have not adopted goals around nutrition, promotion, and education, physical activity. Now, there is some information in our current policy that I can pull, so that's why and we can pull that. But yes, ma'am, that will be done, Dr. Goodwin. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
There should be some that we can pull from our existing strategic plan that would relate there, and that's where I would start in pulling that information. Because we haven't changed that at this point in time. Yep. All right, that's helpful.
That's why I wanted to share it, so give me some direction. Thank you.
Yep. Do we have any other business that the board needs to consider? If not, I would entertain a motion to close.
So moved.
A motion from Ms. Lane and a second from Mr. Grizzard. Any discussion? We're just gonna close the meeting.
Okay.
Yes, close the meeting. All right, so hearing that, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are closed. Have a good evening. Have a safe trip home, folks.
As cold as I am, I know this office.
No, I just